Let's jump right into another explainer. Today, we're totally decoding the spatial anatomy and the absolutely vital functions of the largest lymph node organ in your body. Yeah, we're talking about the spleen. It's fascinating, it's often totally overlooked, and we're going to break it all down so you can literally visualize how it works.
So, let's kick things off with a quick medical riddle. What organ sitting inside of you right now is exactly 1 inch thick, 3 inches wide, 5 inches long, and weighs exactly 7 ounces? I mean, it almost sounds like a riddle designed by a mathematician rather than a biologist, doesn't it?
Well, the answer to our riddle is the spleen, and those numbers actually make up this brilliant cheat code known as Harris's dictum. This simple sequence of odd numbers, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and 11, basically tells us everything we need to know about its size and location. So it's 1 inch thick, 3 inches wide, 5 inches long, and weighs 7 ounces. And those last two numbers? It lies securely tucked away deep to your 9th, 10th, and 11th ribs. Honestly, it's an absolutely fantastic memory trick.
Here's our game plan for today. 1. Meet the spleen. 2. Form, location, and features. 3. Neighbors and impressions. 4. The supply lines. And 5. Clinical connections.
Okay, part 1. Meet the spleen.
While we call it a lymphoid organ, strictly speaking, it's really a hemolymphoid organ. It acts as this highly effective blood filter, just constantly pulling worn-out red blood cells and harmful microbes directly out of your circulation. But wait, it's not just a trash compactor, it's a manufacturer. During fetal life, it's actually making red blood cells, and after birth, it switches gears to produce lymphocytes. It gives your body critical immunity by producing immunoglobulin M or IgM via plasma cells. And if that wasn't enough, the whole shebang acts as a storage unit, holding on to red blood cells and deploying them into circulation whenever you need them.
Moving on to part 2, form, location, and features.
You know, the spleen isn't actually identical in everyone. Most of the time, roughly 44% of us to be exact, it's a wedge shape, kind of looking like a segment of an orange. But in 42% of people, it takes on more of a tetrahedral form. And in about 14% of cases, it's just strictly triangular. So the one sitting inside of you right now might look totally different than the person sitting next to you.
Now think about the superior border of the spleen. It's thin, it's convex, but more importantly, it has these distinct indentations called splenic notches right near its anterior end. And these aren't just random bumps. They're actually a historical clue. These notches show us that the spleen develops by the fusion of separate, smaller masses of lymphoid tissue called spleniculi during fetal development. When they fuse together, they leave these lasting lobulated markers on the adult organ. It's literally like a developmental scar.
All right, part 3, namers and impressions.
So, the spleen is securely tucked high up into the left hypochondrium. That's the upper left region of your abdomen, right between the stomach and the diaphragm. And its living quarters are so incredibly tight that they literally leave a lasting impression on its surface. To really picture this, let's compare its two main faces. On one side, we have the diaphragmatic surface. This side is totally smooth, convex, and points upward and backward because it just glides directly against the smooth dome of your diaphragm. But the other side, the visceral surface, is a completely different story. It's deeply concave and highly irregular. Why? Because it's packed so tightly against your other abdominal organs that it physically molds to their shapes like clay.
Mapping out that visceral surface, you can clearly see exactly who the spleen's neighbors are. The largest indentation is the gastric impression, which is molded perfectly by the fundus of the stomach. Below and behind that, you've got the renal impression, carved out by the left kidney. Down at the bottom lateral end, we have the colic impression from the left colic flexure of your large intestine. And sometimes, right between the hilum and that colic impression, you can even spot a pancreatic impression made by the tail of the pancreas. It's just a stunning physical map of anatomical real estate.
On to part 4, the supply lines.
Have you ever noticed the remarkably tortuous, large, red artery feeding into the spleen? That's the splenic artery, the largest branch of the coeliac trunk. And look how incredibly twisted it is. It almost looks like a coiled spring. But actually, scratch that. It's not a mistake. It's an incredibly clever anatomical design. Because the stomach sits right next to the spleen and expands massively when you eat a huge meal, and because your diaphragm is constantly moving up and down as you breathe, a straight, rigid artery would just get stretched or totally pinched off. The tortuous design lets the splenic artery stretch and move without ever obstructing that vital blood flow. It's basically nature's shock absorber.
Once all that blood has been filtered, it has to exit. But unlike the wildly twisted artery that brings blood in,
The venous blood leaves via the remarkably straight splenic vein. As it makes its straight run behind the pancreas, it acts as this major collection hub. It gathers blood from the short gastric veins, the left gastroepiploic vein, pancreatic veins, and crucially, the inferior mesenteric vein. All of that comes together to eventually help form the massive portal vein, sending all that filtered, nutrient-rich blood straight to your liver.
Finally, Part 5. Clinical Connections.
In a perfectly healthy person, you can't even feel the spleen from the outside. It's hidden and protected perfectly by your rib cage. However, in a medical state known as splenomegaly, the spleen undergoes this abnormal enlargement. And we're not just talking about a slight swelling here. Due to diseases like malaria, cirrhosis of the liver, or chronic myeloid leukemia, the spleen can legitimately increase in size by as much as 10-fold. That is absolutely massive.
Because of the specific ligaments attaching it, when the spleen enlarges that much, it doesn't just expand outward. Its trajectory projects downward and medially, heading right toward the right iliac fossa, essentially following the axis of your 10th rib. And there's another super fascinating clinical correlation here called Keir's sign. If a person takes a severe blow to the abdomen and ruptures their spleen, blood pools under the left dome of the diaphragm. This highly irritating pool of blood triggers the phrenic nerve, and because of how our nervous system is weirdly wired, the patient actually feels this acute, sharp pain all the way up in the tip of their left shoulder. This referred pain is a massive, absolutely crucial red flag for a ruptured spleen.
Which brings us to our final thought. The spleen sits deep inside us, heavily guarded by the 9th, 10th, and 11th ribs. Yet paradoxically, it is literally the most frequently ruptured organ in the entire abdomen following severe blunt trauma. When it ruptures, surgeons often have to do a splenectomy, the complete surgical removal of the organ. We've spent this entire explainer detailing how it filters our blood, creates crucial IgM antibodies, and manages red blood cells. So could you actually survive without it? The astonishing answer is yes. Now, its removal does leave a person with a severely impaired immune response, making them way more vulnerable to specific infections and requiring strict hygiene and vaccinations. But otherwise, they can live a totally normal life. It leaves us to ponder, how can an organ be so intricately designed, so perfectly nestled into our anatomy with such vital daily functions, yet remain completely dispensable to human survival? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time as we continue to map out the incredible machinery of the human body.